My name is David Clarenbach, and I live in Madison, Wisconsin, where I was raised and have spent virtually the entire adult life in my home in Madison, Wisconsin. I was fortunate to have been raised in a feminist household, which I think for someone of my generation, born in the 50s, it was a little unique that my mother and my father worked. And in fact, before I was born, my mother and father taught at Olivet College in Olivet, Michigan. And they both had full-time positions. My mother was paid 1/2 of what my father was paid. She had the PhD, he did not. So even before I was born, I was to have been born in a feminist household. And in my youth, it was particularly noteworthy. As a child, you don't really understand or see those things. But I think it was important, and I, even to this day, have friends who tell me how startled they were to have a two-parent household, both working, yet still one of them was there when we got home from school. We had birthday parties. We had, warm meals. The homework got done. And more often than not, it was my father. And it was a partnership. And I guess that's, to me, the true meaning of feminism, that men can be strong in supporting women just as women can be strong in supporting men, and the combination results in a better society. And I learned that from a very, very early age, and I learned it not from lectures, but by witness and practice day in and day out.
That's wonderful. Did you have siblings when you grew up and other family members living with you, or was it just the main family?
I have 2 sisters, an older sister and a younger sister, and both are very committed feminists too. There are no divisions in the Clarenbach household, and we did cherish the parentage that we had, and I think we all recognized that it served all of us to have that kind of household and that kind of relationship with parents. And while it was unique for us in the 50s and the 60s, it's now much more commonplace, and it doesn't seem like a very earth-shattering thing, but a generation ago, it was not common.
Yeah, it certainly was not. How did you personally get involved in the movements as you grew up?
It was difficult to avoid becoming involved in social reform movements generally. Being a child of the 60s, civil rights, and the war in Vietnam, and all of those were raging in Wisconsin and in Madison. And it was in the mid-60s that my mother started getting involved with the feminist movement as one of the founders of NOW. And we knew what she was doing. And my own involvement in civil rights and against the war in Vietnam was really part and parcel of what she was doing as a feminist leader on the front lines of that struggle. So we really were taught and believed that it's all part of the same movement. It's the humanist approach to society, that all of us are equal and should be treated as individuals and have equal opportunities. And we were shown that, and that's how we lived. There were efforts at the state level in the creation of the Governor's Commission on the Status of Women, for instance, that my mother chaired for quite a number of years in the 60s and 70s. And the commission adopted a series of resolutions and proposals from which the legislature acted. And that included things such as marital property reform, the reform of the sexual assault statutes, the Equal Rights Amendment. And it was the Equal Rights Amendment where I first really got my hands directly involved, because Wisconsin was one of the states, of course, that had adopted, and the right wing focused on Wisconsin very strongly. The Phyllis Schlaflys of the world were alive and well, and those names may be ancient history, but those were very much a part of my life as a young adult, recognizing that those are some of the battles that have to be fought, and they had to be fought not just by women but by men as well.
Would you say the greatest issue for you, or the most prominent issue for you, was the women's movement, or what issue would you identify as you grew up?
Well, I'm gay, and it was I knew I was gay from high school days, but I didn't come out to my parents until I was in my 20s, and they were accepting and supportive. My partner, even before I came out to them, would be there for Christmas and Thanksgiving, and it was clear that we lived together, and we had a domestic partnership, as they would later call it. And so the LGBTQ civil rights movement was an important part of what I felt on a personal level, and also recognizing that it was part of this larger movement. They were not separate and distinct by any means. And I think that in the early stages of the modern feminist movement, there was some friction between those who wanted to narrow the scope of organizing around equality and pay equity and things of that sort, and those that wanted to take a broader approach to include lesbian and gay civil rights as part of the feminist movement. And I'm not sure, but that I helped my mother see the value in the approach of that latter option, that is to include gay and lesbian civil rights as part of the feminist movement. I think that in the early days, at least in the mid-60s, from what I understand, my mother was very concerned that there not be an overreach and that there be a credibility in the broader political arena. And those are balancing tests that one can easily second guess looking back. But we all need to grow and learn, and I know that I've learned many things and I've made many mistakes, and I think that those in my family did not know I was gay. Frequently when you come out to your parents, one of them might say, "Oh, I've known you were gay since you were a kid." Not so much in the Clarenbach household. In fact, my older sister, when I told her, she was in California, I said, "Yeah, I should tell you that I'm gay." Her reaction was, "Are you being blackmailed?" And it's like, no, I'm kind of and the kind of interesting, at least to me, a lot of people were like, "Oh, geez, this must be a risky business for you. You have to be very, very careful." Well, I think that every member of the legislature and every member of the press corps knew that I was gay. Now, I didn't advertise on my campaign literature,
Right.
but I never lied, I never hid, but I was never asked either.
Right, right.
And was a very comfortable environment, and maybe that's unique to Wisconsin, or maybe it was unique to the early 70s when I was first getting involved in electoral politics. But it was no secret, and that, I think, was part of the reason that Wisconsin became that first state to pass a gay rights law to outlaw discrimination based on sexual orientation in employment, housing, and public accommodations. And to this day, still a majority of states do not have those basic civil rights protections.
And when did you decide to run for office, actually?
I was in high school and had been involved in the student rights movement because those who were the consumers of the educational system had virtually no voice in determining how that curriculum and the educational system was structured. So we fought, when I was in high school, to have student representatives on the school board. And we actually were successful. And I wasn't one of them, but there were 2 high school students sitting on the Madison School Board participating in all of the discussions. They were elected by high school students in the Madison public school system. And so from that, I knew that I wanted to devote my adult life to electoral politics. So I ran for the County Board of Supervisors when I was 18, and it was I was the first 18-year-old elected to public office in Wisconsin because the 18-year-old vote was created in the January of 1972, and I was elected in the spring of 1972, so there couldn't have been anyone that slipped under that wire. It also helped me, I think, bring a different approach to politics from a personal standpoint. And in the legislature, when I was elected, I was 21, virtually everyone else in the legislature was old enough to be my father, in almost every case father, not mother, or grandmother or grandfather. So I gave a generational perspective in the legislature, but it also freed me up because I represented a district in Madison that included much of campus and the working class part of the city. I had more freedom and flexibility to speak out on issues like abortion rights and the reform of sexual assault laws, as well as gay and lesbian civil rights. My district wasn't going to turn their back on me because I was speaking out on those, what at that time were considered to be fringe issues. In fact, I used to say that my political future would be in jeopardy if I failed to speak out on those issues. And today, I think that's the standard by which we judge the real stars of this generation that's in power now. Those that take risks and move the boulder up the hill and not be worried about the political ramifications personally, nor the fact that sometimes you lose. But you sometimes gain even when you lose. And I just want to make a very quick example of it.
Great.
We passed a law that legalized consensual sexual activity. Prior to that point, it was known as the sodomy statute, but in fact, it criminalized sex acts that were engaged in on a daily basis between a man and a woman who were legally, lawfully married, as well as gay and lesbian same-sex activities. The process by which we got that bill passed was a journey that took us 8 years.
Oh, wow.
So we were not afraid of losing. You know, the first year it was introduced with the great civil rights leader Lloyd Barbie from Milwaukee, it was laughed out of the legislature. You got to be kidding, not in this lifetime. Next session of the legislature, we got a hearing in committee, and then the next session we got it out of committee, and then the next session we got it to a vote in the state assembly. We lost by 1 vote
Oh, my.
And then we knew we had it. So in 1983, we became legal in Wisconsin.
Incredible.
And our great governor, Tony Earl, the courage that he had to sign on the dotted line.
Oh, that's a wonderful story. Can you state any, as you think back, are there any other significant events that you would like to share that mark your tenure in the assembly or other political events as time went on?
My entrance into politics was something that was a natural flow of how I was raised and what my priorities were with life. My exit was a less smooth and more difficult process. I had served in elected office for more than 20 years, and the incumbent Democratic member of Congress from our district, Bob Kastenmeier, had lost in an upset election in 1990. And it was a Democratic district, and he never should have lost. And so I ran for Congress, and I was supposed to win the election. It's a Democratic district. It's a first-term Republican incumbent. I had raised money, and I had support across the board, or so I thought. And perhaps it's ironic that I was not elected. I didn't even get it past the primary. So I did not get a chance to run against that incumbent Republican. The irony is that I was beat in the primary by a Native American woman. That was the first year of the woman, 1992. And more women were elected, more women ran for public office, and you never know the ebb and flow of political fortunes. It was a very difficult period for me personally, and unfortunately, the woman who won the primary lost to the incumbent Republican member of Congress, and
Badly, as I remember.
Badly, and he served until he chose to leave. And that was unfortunate, but it did allow me freedom from the political process because I had to give up my seat in the state legislature to run for Congress. I was asked to run the Gay and Lesbian Victory Fund in Washington. So I guess my goal of getting to Washington was served, at least in the short run. The Victory Fund is like Emily's List, a political action committee that bundles money to support the candidacies of openly gay and lesbian candidates for public office at the local, state, and federal level. And the Victory Fund helped, I might say, elect people like Tammy Baldwin, who succeeded me in the state assembly, who then succeeded that Republican in Congress, who then was elected and now reelected to the U.S. Senate. And in her place in the state assembly was an openly gay man, Mark Pocan,
Yes.
who then replaced Tammy Baldwin as the congressman in the 2nd Congressional District of Wisconsin. And they both remain in office today and are both doing important work. So at least in some minor way, I hope that I helped maybe grease the skids for those of a different generation to make their mark and make the progress that we're seeing done today.
With all the work that you've done for the state and all the contributions, what positions are you involved in now, if any, in your life, and how would you reflect back on your life?
It's been 48 years since I first decided to commit my life to political and social change. I was 17 when I first decided to run for that first office on the County Board of Supervisors. And I regret not one moment of it. Much frustration and a defeat or two along the way. But what I'm most proud of is what has been accomplished since I left politics. Wisconsin being the first state to pass a gay civil rights law. And people thought, Wisconsin? What? I mean, yeah, New York, Massachusetts, California. Well, it was years before the second state passed a gay rights law.
But that was really attributable to your work.
Well, we were able to build a coalition, an extraordinary coalition. Maybe it was a sign of the times, but the bill was passed in a bipartisan fashion. The margin of victory in both houses of the legislature were provided by Republican votes, and the bill was signed into law by a Republican governor. So that took the partisan bite out of the political risks that we were asking legislators from all across the state to take when they voted for gay rights. Oh, I'm going to get defeated in the next election. No, you can point to the Republican governor and say, well, the Republican... And Lee Sherman Dreyfus said quite eloquently in the signing ceremony, it is a fundamental tenet of the Republican Party that the government ought not intrude into the private lives of individuals, and there is certainly nothing more private nor sensitive than who you love or how you love, and with that, the historic gay rights law was signed into law. Today, we see youngsters who are out, transgendered individuals who are being supported by their communities, their parents, their schools, even the religious communities. We hope more and more, but we built a religious coalition around that gay rights law that included the Catholic Church, because we didn't ask the church leaders to decide whether homosexuality was good or bad or sinful or not sinful or to be encouraged or discouraged. We controlled the terms of the debate. We asked, is bigotry and discrimination to be tolerated against any group in our society? And when that's the question that's posed, the answer is almost a universal no. It is not to be tolerated. And we isolated the moral majority, as they were called at that time, the lunatic fringe that they were and that they are today. And those kind of tactics, I think, would serve us well today as well as we move forward into the new challenges of the future.
Oh, I think that is so well said. It sends shivers up and down my spine to hear it from you. Is there anything else, David, that we have not covered that you'd like to comment on today? I wanted to ask you about how your impression of Pete Buttigieg running openly gay man for president of the United States. And I think that's certainly a marker and a celebration for all of us.
That is, I mean, there are so many groundbreaking landmarks of the gay and lesbian history. I never thought that in my lifetime I would see same-sex marriage legalized in any state, much less nationwide. I didn't think that I would see an openly lesbian member of the United States Senate. And now there are a bunch of gay and lesbian members of the House of Representatives. I mean, it would not have
mind-blowing.
Yes, it would not have been seen. And to have Mayor Pete, as he's called, be not just running. He's not a token candidate. He is being taken seriously. He is a viable contender for the Democratic nomination, and he may not win. He probably won't be nominated, but his mere presence on the stage and in the debates, not as a marginalized fringe candidate, not as a one-issue candidate, which is what they always try to do with not just gays and lesbians, but with feminists. Oh yeah, you're a women's libber, they used to say. Well, I was a women's libber, and I didn't, I was offended by that just as feminists were at the time. So Pete Buttigieg is someone who has already made his mark on history, and he has a bright future. And I don't think that I would put money on his winning the nomination in 2020, But I would not be surprised if he were a candidate and were to be elected president at some point in the future. He certainly has a bright future. He'll be in a cabinet of a Democratic president. He'll be a vice presidential nominee at some point. He and people like him and the people in the next generation keep moving the ball forward. And that's the important thing, whether we're talking about LGBTQ civil rights or reproductive rights or feminism as a whole as part of a humanist movement. Progress is being made, sometimes very slowly, sometimes in a frustratingly ice age sense, but sometimes there are great leaps of progress, great leaps forward. And I think we see some of those being done as we speak.
Well, if there's anything else you'd like to cover, otherwise this has been just a wonderful experience.
I have enjoyed reminiscing, and thank you for the opportunity. This project is so important, not because I'm involved,
it is, yes.
but because people have to know from whence we came. And as generations progress, you know, that history is important. And if for no other reason, as an inspiration to demonstrate that change does happen. It doesn't happen often. Maybe it doesn't happen often enough. It doesn't happen quickly enough, but change can happen.